The Vatican summit on abuse begins next month as Theodore McCarrick faces a trial for his alleged crimes. Papal biographer, columnist, and theologian George Weigel is here with analysis. And later, the son of a Hollywood legend talks about his late father's legacy and his own efforts on behalf of those with special needs. President of the American Wheelchair Mission, Chris Lewis, is here. And finally, how did a former Planned Parenthood director become a pro-life activist? We'll talk about the new film, Unplanned, with the woman who inspired it, Abby Johnson. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. George Weigel, Chris Lewis, and a special preview of the upcoming film Unplanned are all straight ahead. Send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout. Here's some news from the world over. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano added to his ongoing testimony this week. He issued an open letter to Theodore McCarrick urging him to publicly repent for his sins in order to save his own soul and to heal the faithful. The letter was dated January 13th. In it, he writes, "A public repentance on your part would bring a significant amount of healing to a gravely wounded and suffering church." McCarrick is expected to be charged by the Vatican before the sex abuse summit in February. And Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington, D.C., apologized to priests and victims Tuesday for forgetting he knew about allegations against McCarrick as far back as 2004. Wuerl is the acting administrator of the Washington Archdiocese after Pope Francis accepted his resignation at the end of last year. He claimed he didn't even know there were rumors about McCarrick's behavior. But in his latest letter, he says it was never his intention to provide false information about McCarrick. And on Tuesday, the Archdiocese of Baltimore introduced a third-party system for reporting allegations of abuse or misconduct against an archbishop and other bishops serving in the Archdiocese. Archbishop William Lori said that he prayed this step and continued commitment to child protection will send a clear message to the faithful of his local church that abuse of any kind will not be tolerated and that those in positions of authority, namely bishops, will be held accountable for keeping the church safe. Complaints made through this system about bishops will be routed to Baltimore's Diocesan Review Board, a lay-led panel that will be charged with reporting allegations to civil authorities and the Apostolic Nuncio, the Pope's diplomatic representative here in the U.S. And here with analysis of all of this and more is John Paul II biographer, columnist, and author of the book, The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections on Turbulent Times. And boy, are they. George Weigel returns to the program. Great to see you, George.
Thank you, Raymond.
Now, in the piece you've written for First Things, you talk about this upcoming conference in February, this big sex abuse summit at the Vatican. You say expectations should be tamped down. But isn't the Vatican amping it up by disallowing the American bishops to go forward with their proposals? It seems they're building up pressure here to have something big happen.
No, Raymond, you cannot bring together over 105 presidents of national bishops' conferences, the heads of the dicasteries of the Roman Curia, and heaven knows who else, for 4 days and expect them to come up with a global template for dealing with a global problem. If this meeting in February identifies the fact that this is a societal plague, the sexual abuse of the young, if it addresses the problems of sexual dysfunction that seem to have so much to do with this in Catholic clergy, if it summons the whole church to live the virtue of chastity as the integrity of love again, and if it affirms the possibility that national conferences of bishops can make provisions for their situations that, in conformity with canon law, they deem best for their situation. That would be a good 4 days' work. But the notion that there is going to be some Operation Overlord master plan for dealing with all of this out of 4 days is utterly unrealistic.
I want to read you something. This is from the Vatican press office. They're saying the February meeting on the protection of minors has a concrete purpose. The goal is that all of the bishops clearly understand what they need to do to prevent and combat the worldwide problem of the sexual abuse of minors. The Pope wants it to be an assembly of pastors, not an academic conference, a meeting characterized by prayer and discernment, a catechetical and working gathering. Now, George, they strain on 2 occasions, just in a few lines. This is about the protection of minors. Is that too narrow a focus?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the sexual abuse of minors is the most grotesque form of this horror. But it's not the only form of it, as we know in our own situation here in the United States. So to limit this to that is to narrow the lens far too much. The real problem here, from a spiritual and moral point of view, is the refusal to proclaim and then live the Church's ethic of human love. That has to be fully reaffirmed at this summit, and it also should be noted, and hopefully affirmed, that dissent from that ethic has been one factor in creating the culture of duplicity which has led us into this awfulness.
You write in your piece in First Things this week, what the February meeting must not do is make matters worse by swallowing and then propagating some of the fairy tales circulating in Rome about the Church in the United States, like the noxious fiction that the U.S. bishops have overreacted to what is essentially a media-created crisis. Do they really think that in Rome?
Yeah, some people do, and this is the same thing that some people were thinking in 2002, as you remember.
Right.
This is American hysteria over media hysteria, et cetera.
And it's an American problem, the American problem.
Look, we know this is a world problem. We know there are large abuse problems in Latin America, Germany, Ireland, God only knows, Canada, et cetera. So the notion that this is something that the Americans are overreacting to is not only bad, Raymond, it misses the crucial point that the Church in the United States has done more to address this problem than any other local church in the world. And Cardinal DiNardo should say that, frankly, at this meeting. We have a lot more to do. There's a lot more reform to be undertaken here. But we have done more about this than anyone else, including the Vatican.
Yeah, I was about to say, this is a Roman problem as well now, because Rome is turning a deaf ear to some of the complaints of folks. You also mentioned there's the Protestantization fairy tale. In Roman circles, it's said that panicky U.S. bishops cobbled together reform proposals that would gravely diminish episcopal authority by handing great chunks of that authority to the lay people, a Protestantizing move. Your reaction. And that this is the result of too many converts in the U.S. church today. That's my favorite.
This is a family program, so I will temper my reaction.
Please.
This is utter and complete nonsense, and that it should come out of a Vatican during a pontificate that began with Evangelii Gaudium, and we're all supposed to be missionary disciples and a church permanently in mission. Now we're complaining because too many people are entering into full communion with the church. This is completely crazy and quite duplicitous. It's an attempt to appeal to anti-American sentiments, which are rife all over the world. And the notion that empowering lay people who know the limits of their competence, but who also have some skills, to aid the bishops in their work of reform, that this somehow diminishes episcopal authority, is exactly 180 degrees wrong. It helps rebuild the authority and the credibility that has been lost.
I want to read you something. This is from Marie Collins, who was a member of that protection of minors committee they had at the Vatican. She resigned that position, I think, out of frustration. Here's what she said. The Vatican has not clearly set out what actually constitutes sexual abuse of a minor in the view of the official church. At the moment, the vagueness of the canon law in regard to abuse often leads to canon law trials not being able to bring in a guilty verdict in cases where most people would see clearly abuse has occurred. Is that a valid criticism?
Yeah, I'm not a canonist, so I really can't say, but I have heard many capable canon lawyers say that there does need to be a review of the present legal norms in the church relating to this. One item that might be remembered in all of this from 16 years ago is that when this first broke in 2002, the Long Lent of 2002, Cardinal Francis George, brilliant man, said part of our problem here is that the 1983 Code of Canon Law bent over backwards so far to protect priests from authoritarian bishops that it has stripped bishops of authority they need to deal quickly with situations. That certainly is something that needs to be revisited. Now, the American bishops tried to deal with that through the Dallas Charter and this particular law for the United States. There are a lot of moving parts in this. This is a complex subject. Even when we're talking about episcopal irresponsibility, there are distinctions to be made between a mistake, malfeasance out of weakness or whatever, and wickedness. I mean, those are three different things.
Right.
And sorting out how you frame that legally is not going to be an easy job, but it has to be done. Because right now, the evangelical mission of the church is being seriously imperiled, and the church's capacity to say to the world, you know, you too have some problems on this front is virtually extinguished, at least from official Catholicism.
No, it blunts the moral credibility and voice of the church, and that's what's going on here. We talked earlier about the narrowing of what this summit is about, and it has been now described as a summit on the protection of minors. But in so many of these instances that we're reading about every day, it is really the abuse of adults, vulnerable adults, seminarians, and others who would not be considered minors. It's teenage boys and up that seem to be the target of a lot of this abuse. Last week, we saw the breaking news that Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington knew in 2004, because of a complaint that came to him from a priest that he forwarded to the nuncio, of charges against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Now, just this summer, in August, he told a local CBS affiliate this.
Were you aware of the rumors McCarrick was having relationships with other priests?
No.
How does this affect the meeting in Rome? Will this have any bearing on it?
This tragic and very sad circumstance here in Washington has underscored the imperative of honesty on the part of clergy in addressing these problems. The instinct to protect the church can be an honorable instinct. But when that leads to obfuscation or to flat out lying, that wrecks the credibility that was intended to be protected. So what I would take out of this very, very sad situation here is the imperative of as much openness as is possible. Now, calls for full transparency are going to eventually bump up into confessional material and things that we would say are in the internal forum. So, no, there has to be some understanding that there are boundaries even on transparency. But the notion that the church is protected by hiding the truth from the people of the church, this just has to go. I mean,
well, and
really
there seems to be a compartmentalization that we haven't escaped yet. We heard it there with Cardinal Wuerl. Well, he was involved with these priests. They were adults. So that's kind of put aside as opposed to abuse of minors. When it rose to the grave, disgusting level of abuse of minors, then everybody gets engaged. It seems that the blind spot, the blinders remain in place as we go into the summit in Rome.
Well, this is why I said at the beginning that this whole discussion has to be framed in terms of a call to the entire church to rediscover chastity as the integrity of love, as John Paul II called it. And we have to understand that this abuse issue it certainly includes the protection of children and minors. But the overwhelming majority of this stuff, at least in our context here in the U.S., and I suspect elsewhere, involves teenage boys, young men, adolescents, and it often happens in ecclesiastical contexts, like seminaries or whatever. Now, again, it would be very helpful if it were made clear at this meeting in February that the church in the United States has basically learned how to deal with these problems.
Right.
We have reformed seminary recruitment. We have reformed seminary formation. We working
protected
hard.
children in the school setting, by and large.
We have Catholic schools in the United States are far safer for children than public schools.
Yep.
Everybody knows this. We're waiting for a state attorney general to figure this out and do something about it. We have some things to offer the world church on this. So if this meeting in February cannot be a beat up on the church in the United States meeting, A, because that's false, and B, because we actually have some things to offer everyone else.
But this is the church willing to talk about it, and where the people are most vocal and excised about
and
the
has
fallout.
done something about it.
Right. What does this whole episode, particularly the McCarrick, the world admission about McCarrick, what does it tell us now about the validity of the Vigano charges? Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, writing in his testimony in the summer, that world knew about the abuse of McCarrick and stood by and did nothing, and that the Pope knew about it.
Well, you'll remember at the time of Archbishop Vigano's first letter that I wrote my weekly Catholic Press column on this, saying, I knew this man the entire 5 years he was here. He has always struck me as an honest man. I think there are some things in that first testimony that were emotionally overwrought and misfires. But on the two key points, that he tried to warn the Holy See and the Holy Father about this bomb that could go off at any time, I believe he is telling the truth.
We'll see what happens in the coming days. Now he's calling for McCarrick to publicly repent before he
That was
goes to his
a
maker.
gesture of fraternal concern. I mean, Archbishop Vigano is a very good priest, and he knows that Cardinal McCarrick, Archbishop McCarrick, excuse me, perhaps soon to be Mr. McCarrick, is an 88-year-old man, not in the greatest of mental health right now. And insofar as he could possibly help him recognize the evil that he's done, repent of it, get his soul in order, I think he wanted to try to do that. And I don't read that letter as any more than that.
Yeah, no, that's how I read it as well. The Diocese of Baltimore has instituted, the Archdiocese, a new plan where any lay complaints about priests would be brought, or bishops, would be brought to the other bishops in a given diocese, particularly Baltimore, and that would be referred to a review board. A good idea?
It's one attempt to try to break out of the cone of incredibility here, and we'll see how it works. This is not an easy business. I mean, I have supported the idea of a national lay commission to receive complaints, to go back to my triad of mistakes, malfeasance, or flat-out wickedness on the part of bishops, to assess those according to a serious set of criteria that would be developed, and then to report those to the proper church authorities if they were deemed credible. Once you do that, there is going to be a flood of stuff. Most of it will not be credible. And so we'll see what, maybe this Baltimore proposal can be a test run on, does this open the door to a kind of panic-driven flood of allegations that really have no bearing to them, or is this a way to really sort things out?
Before I let you go, I've got to get your opinion on this. This week we saw 2 federal judges block those new HHS rules that the Trump administration put forward that would allow religiously concerned people and people based on conscience to opt out of that contraceptive mandate, including the Little Sisters of the Poor. It looks like those rules are blocked. Your thoughts, is this, again, an assault on religious liberty.
Yeah, of course it is, but we're going to win it, if not at the appellate level, then at the Supreme Court level. What is truly amazing about all this, Raymond, is that the other side simply refuses to give up here. It simply refuses to recognize what has been made manifestly clear for 8-9 years now, that you can't do this and get away with it in our constitutional system. Yet, because for these people, contraception is almost a kind of sacrament, they keep forging ahead. I will win at the next 2 levels. Our friends at the Beckett Fund will take care of that, I'm sure.
George Weigel, thank you for being here. The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections on Turbulent Times by George Weigel is available in bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you for being here, George.
Thank you.
Great to see you. My next guest grew up among Hollywood royalty, the son of the late comic legend, my pal Jerry Lewis. He had a front row seat to a golden age of entertainment. I sat down with him recently to talk about his late father's legacy and his own vocation of bringing the gift of mobility to the disabled by founding the American Wheelchair Mission. Here's my exclusive interview with Chris Lewis. Chris, you really follow in your father's footsteps in a couple of ways, and I want to highlight the 2 that I know of. First of all, what's become a big part of your life's work, the American Wheelchair Mission. This really came from working with your dad all those years on the MDA telethon.
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
Well, I started working on the MDA telethon when I was 14 years old. And a lot of people have said, you know, don't you want to do what your dad did? And I said, well, I really kind of did. Just not the silly stuff, the stuff that really meant something, the stuff that touched me and touched my parents and our family, and just felt very natural.
And where did the first impulse for this notion of distributing wheelchairs to parts of the world and country that people didn't have? How many people lack wheelchairs? You'd think everybody who wants a wheelchair can get one.
The closest estimate we can come up with is about 100 million people in the world need a wheelchair, cannot afford one, and no other type of mobility device would help them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you felt called to this particular
We're
need.
not. Yeah, we weren't the only people doing it, but it's been done for quite a few years on a smaller basis. But since 2000, there have been some very inspired people that have gotten involved. The LDS Church was one of the first to get involved, and of course we work with the Knights of Columbus and the Equestrian Order and all sorts of organizations. Caritas has been doing it for years, and they're our distribution partner in many countries. So it's something that just rang true with me when I heard about it and got involved in it, and I've been doing it 19 years now.
And working with people with special needs was really second nature after what you'd spent so much of your childhood and adulthood doing.
Absolutely, because that all inspires prayers, being thankful for my kids and their health. And prayer inspires thought, inspires action, and turns into answering prayers.
I want to talk about a few other things. You are here in the D.C. area because you just delivered the second shipment. This is like Smokey and the Bandit Part 2. You know, you had to go first cross-country, now the second pass.
Yes.
What did you bring to the Library of Congress? You have been bringing bits of your father's legacy, really.
Yeah, my dad donated his entire film and television archive to the Library of Congress back in 2015. So the first shipment was most of the film, much of the tape. The second one was the second half of all the tape, production papers, scrapbooks, photographs, proof sheets, things that pertain to the
creation of these
classics. But not just his films, but also all the audio tapes of his live performances and interviews and television. And so, yeah, it's so deep, it's going to take years for them to...
Wow. You recently released a box set of his 10 favorite films. What were they and why?
They were basically the films that he created himself the most, that were closest to him, the ones he directed. The Bellboy, his first directorial production, The Errand Boy, Cinderfella and the Nutty Professor and Family Jewels. And through Paramount Pictures, who we've had a wonderful relationship with for 50 years plus, they said there's still a segment of people who want to own the Jerry Lewis DVDs, and Walmart jumped on it, and they sold more of those than they did any of the other product that they had out in that quarter.
Wow.
And so they re-upped it, and we're doing it and hoping to spread it more overseas.
Now, to what do you attribute that? What do you think that, what does that audience need that they're answering there, and do you think he still speaks to?
Well, it's fun, it's funny, it's available to any audience. You don't have to worry about what's being said, what's being seen, and it doesn't matter what language you speak, because this crazy guy gets you to laugh no matter what he's saying or doing, or falling down. Or
I was stunned. 3,000 canisters you conveyed, film canisters, to the Library of Congress.
Yes.
It's a massive collection. What shocked you that you found among these papers, these films, that you didn't realize were there, or you didn't think you'd find?
Constantly being shocked,
Really?
actually, yes. The depth of what my dad kept. Anything that had to do with the creative process, he kept. He had kinescopes made of all of his performances starting back in the 1940s. The library was actually saying, we don't have any of these shows. They didn't exist. They were only broadcast live. But he would call the American Kinescope Company and say, I want a copy for myself. So all of the Johnny Carson shows that he hosted for weeks at a time, we had kinescopes. All 28 of the Martin Lewis Colgate Comedy Hours from 1950 to 55, he had the only copies. So it's a treasure trove for the library.
Well, are you planning any further releases? And explain to the audience how this works. Your father donated all of his films to the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
What about the copyright? Do you retain that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so the family still retains that.
Yes.
Okay.
And we did some screenings of some of his films up at MoMA, at the Museum of Modern Art
The
in New
Unknown
York.
Jerry, tell us about that.
Yeah, some of the films that he made himself. He was behind the camera a lot. He would have his friends over. Dean Martin, Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh. They would just be playing around.
These are kind of at-home productions with some of the biggest stars in the Hollywood galaxy.
Production, sync sound, and we're in the process of restoring them now, basically, because they were only one copy, 16mm copies, that he showed through his projector 20, 30, 40 times. So now we've got the one only, and we're in the process of doing that with the Library of Congress, restoring them. The Museum of Modern Art has a current exhibition running called Looking at Jerry Lewis, the Nutty Professor storyboards. So they are actually displaying the storyboards that my dad used to create the Nutty Professor. Wow. And that's on display in their film area. It's opened on the 6th of October, and it runs until the 3rd of March. So you can actually go and see the one-of-a-kind artwork that was used in that, and the curator, Ron Magliazzi and Dave Kerr, who are good friends of my dad, they put together a wonderful perspective of clips from the film and how my dad's creativity influenced all of these things, and his love of bright colors, and you've seen his house. I mean, bright red carpeting.
He liked that red, yellow, bright colors. In fact, I remember Sandra, his secretary, telling me, depending on the color he wears that day, we know just what his mood is. So it was like a mood ring. Yeah. What was Jerry wearing that day? And everybody could tell what mood was what they were about to encounter. Yeah. Will the Library of Congress be doing a similar display, I imagine, with the treasure trove they have?
Yes,
have to.
Yes, and the library and MoMA work together, and they're working with other groups. So we're basically doing everything through the Library of Congress, because number one, they're so good at what they do, and they have such great connections. So it's an honor to work with them, and it's opening doors all over the world.
I love it. I saw a New York Times piece recently about really his unreleased film that has arrested so much attention globally. They've done documentaries on it at the BBC. This New York Times piece, I saw a Variety piece last year, and it's about The Day the Clown Cried, which is a film he shot, never released. I asked him about it when we spoke. I want you to watch this. The Day the Clown Cried?
No.
No, you have that one. You kept that back. We're not going to talk about that because I'm
You
tired
can.
of everybody and their dog have talked about it. I personally think I would love to see it because of your artistry, but there's such expectations now built about what's in that canister.
What was it you said about what I brought to it?
The artistry that you have shown throughout your work.
That's the problem. There was no artistry.
No?
No, and the work was bad.
So you didn't want people to see it?
The work wasn't even, as far as I'm concerned, my critique was, it wasn't even something you should show to the public. That's how bad it turned out.
You say that this was very close to his heart, this film.
Yes.
Tell me about it. And are there more? Is there a complete cut of this film?
Not to my knowledge. I don't believe there is a complete cut. We saw a work print back in the early 70s. I think that's all there was, because it was a co-production between a French, Swedish, and American company. And the producer from America ended up not paying the writer. My dad never had the rights to rewrite it. And it just fell apart. So the negative exists in probably 3 different countries. And Nobody could finish it, even if they wanted to.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I know there are some interested. They rehabilitated an old unfinished Orson Welles movie.
Yes.
Netflix released it. Would you be interested in seeing something like that happen with The Day the Clown Cried?
Well, I think since you can talk about history, I think going back and looking at it from a historical standpoint would be very interesting. That I would think would be good. But since there's no way to get your hands on the actual negative, it was tied up in so much litigation, so many people lost money. When the New York Times or the LA Times articles came out, people were calling my dad's office, threatening him, if you do anything, release anything, we'll sue you in a second. And it's still, that's many years
It's still tied
later.
up in a lot of different rights. But the Library of Congress claims they have in their possession now, which you gave them, backstage images of from associated. So kind of the behind the scenes
Yes.
of shooting the film, staging the film. Maybe that would make a documentary or something.
Actually, it would make a very
time?
good documentary if the person he had handed the camera to knew how to use it.
Oh no, it's all over the place. It's a mess.
Several 2,000-foot reels of color reversal film, and you see his shoes more than you see what's happening behind the camera.
When I was with your dad at the house in Vegas, he showed me clips of his live stage act from the 60s in Paris to, and I saw him later in Vegas as a kid with Sammy Davis on stage, which I know you were involved in at the time. Any thought of releasing those live performances or a collection of those?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there are some that have been available in the past. HBO did one on Jerry and Sammy. We have several of the live performances that were released years ago back on videotape. And we have the raw footage from Australian performances that he did in '99 before he got sick.
Wow.
So that's kind of like untouched gems that we can go back and put something together.
Let's talk about your work now. I imagine there's a big hole in your heart. Well, I know there is, with the absence of your dad. You were so close to him, and as he told me when I asked him, what's your legacy? He said, that guy right there, and he pointed to you. And you are carrying that legacy forward. Do you feel a sense of, is it a burden? Is it a weight that you feel you have to carry that legacy forward?
Not a burden or a weight at all. It's an honor, a pleasure. My dad was many things, but the level of creativity that he attached to doing things right, he always found a way to do it right, and he taught me that. And so the legacy that I'm keeping alive is we're helping people who can't help themselves. We're answering people's prayers. He was the one who said, we're doing God's work on earth. That's the first time I heard it, is when he said it.
About MDA, the work at MDA and the telethon.
And that it's amazing what you can accomplish if it doesn't matter who gets the credit. That was another one of his favorite sayings.
What's next for the American Wheelchair Mission? What would you like to see happen next?
Well, we have been delivering a lot of wheelchairs into the Christian families in the Middle East, working with the Caritas organizations in Jerusalem, Lebanon, Jordan. It's very frustrating. It's hard. It's hard to help these people. We're doing a lot in Vietnam. Caritas Vietnam, I think, is one of our best distribution partners in the world. But the need is enormous. It's just enormous. But the Knights of Columbus have been there for us, helping the American veterans who don't qualify for VA benefits or need an additional wheelchair. The Knights are there to supply them with it, and it's wonderful. There's more of that we can do. We'd like to get more people involved. Did you know there are retired priests and nuns who don't have wheelchairs?
No. Wow.
I had that discussion with Cardinal Dolan in New York, April of last year, and we have a program going on with the Knights in New York now where they're working to get wheelchairs to any priest, nun that needs them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Chris Lewis, thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do and for the joy that you continue to spread via your father's work and the good work you're doing with the Wheelchair Mission. It's
my pleasure.
It's incredible. Thank you. You can find out about Chris Lewis and his work at the American Wheelchair Mission at amwheelchair.org. And looking at Jerry Lewis, the Nutty Professor Storyboards runs through March 3rd at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Visit MoMA.org for more details. Abby Johnson and ASHLEY Bratcher are up next, but first, a little more news to share with you. The 46th Annual March for Life will take place on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. on Friday, January 18th. Thousands will gather from across the country to pray for an end of abortion. The theme for this year's march is unique from day one. Pro-life is pro-science. Vice President Pence will speak at the March for Life Rose Dinner on Friday evening. In 2018, Donald Trump became the first sitting president to address the rally through a live video system. There will be several performers and speakers at this year's march, including one of my next guests. You can watch the March for Life live on EWTN Friday, January 18th. In 2009, my next guest quit her job as a clinic director for Planned Parenthood in Texas after observing an ultrasound during an abortion. Now, since then, she's become a leader in the pro-life movement and founder of And Then There Were None, a ministry helping abortion clinic workers to transition out of the industry. A decade later, her story is hitting the big screen. Her book about her journey, Unplanned, has been made into a movie set to be released this spring. Joining me now to discuss the film is Abby Johnson and the actress portraying her, ASHLEY BRATCHER. Ladies, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to start with you, Abby. I remember it's been, I think, 9 years since we last talked about the book and your story. For those who might not know, what drew you to Planned Parenthood in the first place? What did you think you were doing when you came aboard that organization?
You know, I thought I was just there to help women. Didn't think I was there to sell abortion or promote abortion. I really believed the talking points that they had given me, that we were there to serve women, particularly low-income women, and that abortion was just something we did to keep women safe. It was sort of a necessary evil. And I learned that that was different through my years at Planned Parenthood, that we were actually selling abortion.
And you were there for 8 years.
8 years.
Wow. Now, tell us about that moment in 2009 when the lights came on for you.
Yeah.
What was that moment?
I was asked to come in and witness a live ultrasound-guided abortion procedure on a 13-week-old baby in the womb. And I watched in horror as this 13-week-old child was moving away from the abortion instruments, and it appeared that this baby was trying to fight and struggle to save his own life. And I knew then that there was humanity in the womb, and that abortion was taking an individual human being's life. And I knew that I was on the wrong side of this debate.
Wow. Ashley, how familiar were you with Abby's story when you first auditioned for this role?
I had no idea who Abby was. I'm so sorry. And when I got the audition and I read it, I thought maybe she continued working on at Planned Parenthood, that this was going to be a pro-choice film. It wasn't until after the audition that I was so compelled by what I read in the script that I looked up Abby. I saw her testimony online, and I was just shaken to the core. I was floored by what I'd heard, because I think, much like the general public, I didn't know what the actual abortion procedure entailed. And hearing her describe it, I was just crying on the floor.
Wow. When did you know you had the role?
The day that they sent me out to Oklahoma. I had auditioned weeks prior.
Where?
I taped myself in Atlanta and sent a tape in to the producer. Heard nothing at all. I felt in my spirit very strongly that I was meant to play this role. It wouldn't leave me. It was different than any other thing I had ever auditioned for, but still just silence, complete silence, until a couple of days before I got word from the producers that they wanted me to retape with a different direction, and they said, we'll let you know by Monday. Monday came and went, never heard anything. And I thought, okay, well, this isn't mine. I had a conversation with them Monday night, and I thought, okay, this is it, I've got it. And they said, just so you know, we've got one other person in the running that we're really considering, so we don't know if it's gonna be you yet. The next morning at 12 o'clock, 11:30, 12 o'clock, they call me and say, hey, can you get on a plane in 5 hours? Get ready to film in Oklahoma for 7 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, okay, I guess nothing's impossible.
Yeah.
And I called my husband, made arrangements for my child to get picked up at the bus stop, and got on a plane to Oklahoma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of pro-life, I guess, leaving the kid behind.
He was
That
in
might
good
be
care.
considered a little anti-life, but I'm not going to dwell on that part of the story. Abby, I want to get back to you. I'm coming back to you, though. This is a very interesting through line here in your personal life that I think people might want to hear about. Abby, there was a New York Times piece recently about the mistreatment of pregnant women who work at Planned Parenthood clinics. Now, you were pregnant when you were working at Planned Parenthood.
I'm always pregnant.
How were you? You're witnessing life all the time. Tell me, how were you treated? And was it discouraged to have children and to be pregnant at Planned Parenthood?
Yes, it was absolutely discouraged. I actually talked to the New York Times reporters, and they asked me, can you tell us anybody else who had a baby during your 8 years working at Planned Parenthood inside of your affiliate? And there was no one. I was the only person in 8 years who had a child. Now, I was not the only person that got pregnant. There were many of my coworkers that got pregnant, but when you work at Planned Parenthood, they offer you free abortions if you get pregnant. And so my coworkers had taken advantage of that perk and had abortions. I was encouraged almost daily during my pregnancy to have an abortion with my daughter. And I remember being so thankful when I finally hit 24 weeks, because at that time abortion was illegal after 24 weeks in Texas. And I thought, okay, finally the comments will stop.
I want to read you something. Dr. Leanna Wen is the new president of Planned Parenthood, who's been going around the country speaking about women's health care and that the organization provides that primarily. A recent headline from BuzzFeed entitled, "Planned Parenthood's New President Wants to Focus on Non-Abortion Health Care," caused Wen to tweet out the following. She said, "I am always happy to do interviews, but these headlines completely misconstrue my vision for Planned Parenthood. Our core mission is providing, protecting, and expanding access to abortion and reproductive health care." Now, she's clearly saying there that's the business model. Now, Planned Parenthood has long said that's not how they make their money, Abby. Your thoughts?
You know, I remember a few years ago when Trump took office, he told Cecile Richards, their previous president, if you guys will stop doing abortions, we will stop trying to defund you. If you really want to focus on women's health care, focus on women's health care, get rid of the abortions, we'll keep funding you. And I remember her Twitter response. She said, abortions, she said, at Planned Parenthood, abortions are as critical as cancer screening pap smears. And I thought, well, there you go. All of us who have worked at Planned Parenthood, we can attest to that. We can say, yes, that's absolutely their business model. I was encouraged, along with many others, to increase our abortion quota, to double our abortion quota. So we've known for a long time that this is about abortion. Honestly, I'm glad that they're just being honest about it, and that they're now not trying to hide behind the fact that they're a women's health care organization. Let's put it out like it is. Their highest revenue generating product, abortion.
Yeah, they claim it's 3% of their income. Now, I want to play a clip from the movie that actually speaks to this. This is from the movie Unplanned. Watch.
Abby, let me explain something to you. Fast food outlets look to break even on the hamburgers they sell. That's all they do, is break even. Do you know how they make their money?
No.
On the French fries and the soda, the low-cost, high-margin items.
Cheryl, I'm sorry, but I don't understand.
Abortion is our fries and soda.
But we're a nonprofit organization.
Nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model.
Did this happen this way, this exchange about fast food? Or is this dramatic license?
We did have a conversation similar to this about abortion being our low-cost, high revenue, and the line where she says, I said, but we're a nonprofit. And she says, nonprofit is a tax status, not a business status.
Oh, boy. How involved were you in the shaping of this script? Were you on set also?
I was on set, and they sent me the script and said, tell us what you think, like fingers crossed. And really, there were only a few minor things. They did such a good job at really sticking to the book, Unplanned, and the then subsequent writings, you know, through articles and things.
Right.
So it really wasn't a lot that I had to say, I don't like that. I mean, they...
I want to talk to you for a moment, Ashley. Was there any hesitation about accepting this role?
None whatsoever.
Given the subject matter, and that there are people who will go, you know what, this crosses the line for us.
No hesitation whatsoever. As soon as I saw Abby's testimony, I was compelled. I knew that this was a topic that we needed to discuss, and I wanted this film to be a conversation starter. Because when someone makes a complete 180 in their life, someone who was so pro-choice, such a women's advocate, and all of a sudden steps away from it, you have to stop and wonder why. So no matter where you stand on the issue, I think that this is a movie for everyone, because you will be touched by her story no matter what you believe.
Yeah, and this story actually touched you in a way you didn't expect. Tell people what happened. I mean, once you started sharing the storyline here with your family, you learned something.
Right. I left so fast for Oklahoma that I didn't have time to tell everyone where I was. My husband and my sister knew, and my son, obviously.
Yeah, your son's at the bus stop now, still waiting for you to pick him up, but go ahead.
He was in good hands.
Yeah, we're sending props for him.
So my mother called me on the 4th day that I had arrived for production. And I'm sitting in a salon getting my hair colored red, and I take the phone call because I need to let my mom know where I am. I mean, proper etiquette, right? And my mother had shared with me when she was younger, she had had an abortion in high school. And she mentioned that when she got pregnant with me when she was 19, that she had considered aborting, but that was not an option. She could never do that again. And that was the only conversation we ever had about it. It was very nonchalant. So when I went to explain Abby's story to her and let her know the role that I was playing, I was very careful because I didn't want her to feel judged. I didn't want to upset her in any way. And as I proceeded to explain everything within the story, she completely broke down. I could hear her uncontrollably weeping through the phone. And she said to me, "I need to tell you something that you never knew before. When I was pregnant with you, I was actually at the clinic. My name had been called. I had just been examined by a very pregnant nurse. And I was laying on the clinic table when I got very sick, and I decided that I couldn't go through with it. And I decided to get up and walk out, and I chose you. And I never knew that before accepting this role. And I think I get so emotional every time I tell the story because for me, I just sit in awe that God cares for us so personally that He would plan our steps from conception, that I would stand and be able to tell Abby's story, never having known my own story. You know, at some point, I think I'll start carrying tissues, but every time I tell the story, I think, oh, I'm not going to cry this time because I've told it a million times. But it never gets any easier to look at your life and examine all the experiences you've had and the relationships you've built and think that it almost never happened.
You know, it's amazing. Stories, this is why stories are so important. And to share those stories, whether they're our own or other people's, I think it connects us and it helps us make sense of our world and allows us the freedom to talk about these other stories. Your father also confirmed, I know the story for you.
Yes. So my parents divorced when I was in college, and I called my father afterwards to have a conversation with him because I told my mom, I said, I just need some time to process this. And when I called him, he confirmed every detail. And I said, Dad, how is it that all these years no one ever told me? And he said, how do you tell your daughter that you intended to abort her? That never seems like an appropriate time to have that conversation. But he also confirmed that they were very young. They thought that this was their only solution, but they didn't have enough money for the abortion. So in order to pay for the abortion, my father pawned a family heirloom, which happened to be a shotgun. And that was another thing that just blew me away, that we view human life so cheap that it's the equivalent to a pawned shotgun, of all things. The beautiful part of that story is, though, that when my mom left that clinic, she used that money to buy maternity clothes and a crib and to prepare for me.
Wow, beautiful. Abby, what did you think when you heard this story? I mean, this had to give you, I mean, you hear a lot of these stories in your ministry, which we're going to get to in a second. But what did you think when you heard this?
You know, the first time that Ashley and I spoke on the phone, I felt a real connection to her, you know, which I had really prayed that I would, because I thought, oh, I want to like the actress.
Like this would be awkward.
That would be weird. So I really prayed for that, and I loved her instantly. And I remember thinking, this is the person that God has planned to play this part. And then when she told me the story, I thought, oh my gosh, it was just further confirmation that her life was saved so that she can help show our culture and our society what we are doing to our unborn brothers and sisters. And what a great gift that God has given her in this role, not just because it's about my story, but it's truly God's story. And he is using her in such a mighty and powerful way. And it's really beautiful and very touching.
I'll say, amazing how art and reality start intertwining and used for a higher purpose. Give me a sense, Abby, when you were last here, were you Catholic yet?
No.
When did you come into the church?
April of 2012.
Wow. And what was that process? What drew you there?
Well, when I first became pro-life, all of my new friends were Catholic. And so we were looking for a new church because the Episcopal Church where we had been going fired us. They said, you're pro-life, you can no longer be here, which was fine because I didn't want to go there anyway. But I sort of wanted to fire them. But anyway, and so we were looking for a new congregation, and all of our Catholic friends were really saying, you should come to Mass, you should come. And Doug and I had sort of grown up with some anti-Catholic sentiments, right, in our Protestant churches that we grew up in. And so we were like, ugh, no, we're not doing that. So one Sunday we said, look, let's just go to Mass. We'll go, we'll tell them we hated it, and then they'll stop bothering us. I mean, really, that's sort of what we thought. And
that never worked, you know.
It didn't work.
It never works.
It didn't work, Raymond.
I try to do that when people send me books and films. I didn't like. They keep coming at you. But go on.
So
taking
we
you
go.
off the
So my
path.
husband and I, we go to Mass, and we're sitting there, and I just remember walking away, and we both were sitting in the car, and we were just like, that felt right. Something about that, and it was shocking to us because we didn't think anything about the Catholic Church was right. But here we are, and it felt like home. And as soon as I told one of my new Catholic friends this, we were suddenly sitting in RCIA. and honestly, though, the more we learned about the church, the more we learned about this beautiful, rich faith, the more we realized that that was home. And so my husband and I actually came in to the church together, which was such a blessing. And we had our marriage convalidated. And so, it's been beautiful.
Now, tell me, as part of your work, you have brought 400 former Planned Parenthood clinic workers out of Planned Parenthood. What do they tell you? What's the fear? And why do they have to come to you for help to get out? I mean, it's a job. Can't they just leave?
Yeah. You know, it's not like working at some fast food restaurant. Number one, the spiritual warfare, intense.
I'll bet.
Even when they start deciding, maybe this isn't what I want to do anymore, the spiritual warfare starts coming at them. So there's that. But they are told that if you ever leave us, if you ever start talking about what you've seen here, we're going to take you to court.
Oh, boy.
You can never talk about what has happened here.
Sounds like a cult.
It is. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. And you're really brainwashed while you work there. And they also tell these workers, if you leave, we will give you a bad reference. You will not be able to get another job. And so the fear is, number one, of course, lack of income, right? A lot of the workers that we have helped are single parents. So they're working 50, 60 hours a week at the clinic. So, you know, how do you leave your job? How do you find another job when you're working that many hours? But the second thing is just fear of retaliation from the abortion industry. And so they have a team of us, you know, who can surround them and support them. And we have access to business owners, managers, and we can say, hey, are you willing to give this gal a shot?
Right.
And that makes all the difference. It makes them feel empowered enough to take that first step.
Before I let you all go, Ashley, I'll start with you. What do you want people to come away after seeing Unplanned? What do you want them to see, understand, and feel?
The first thing I'd like for people to recognize is an undeniable revelation that there is life within the womb, but also to understand that there is grace, there is hope, there is forgiveness. This is a story of redemption, that you've never gone too far, that you have outreach the Father's hand. There, you can always come back. And there's also a beautiful love story here. Doug loves Abby unconditionally, and I think he really exhibits the love of Jesus in a marriage. So it's a beautiful story of hope and definitely a conversation starter.
Mm-hmm. Powerful piece. What did you think when you first saw it? It's got to be surreal watching your life unfold on the screen and a dramatic moment in your life.
It was weird. Yeah, it's still weird.
Yeah.
I've seen it a bunch of times. It's still weird. The first time I watched it, I kept thinking to myself, I kept reminding myself, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for God. Because it's difficult to watch the most challenging, the most sinful moments of your life played out on a screen for the public to see. But I just had to keep reminding myself that this is for God. This is for His glory. And if the expose of my sin will cause one person to turn to Him or turn back to Him, then it's worth it.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you both for being here and for your beautiful stories and witness. Thank you both.
Thank you.
The movie is Unplanned. It's based on the story of Abby Johnson, starring ASHLEY BRATCHER. It opens in theaters everywhere this spring on March 29th. Check your local listings or visit unplanned.com for more information. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, you can follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And Book 3 of The Adventures of Will Wilder is out next month. Will Wilder, The Amulet of Power, hits stores on February 19th, but you can pre-order your copy now at the usual outlets, and I would love that. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.